When it comes to remotely controlling digital audio hardware, MIDI is mostly used. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, and the Behringer Wing can do both. It can control other devices remotely, but it can also be remotely controlled via MIDI. I'll show you how it works and what you need for it in today's episode of Basti's Crafting Hour. Enjoy! Hello dear audio engineers, dear mixing friends. Welcome back to Basti's Tinkering Hour. Today, everything revolves around the topic of MIDI. I'm going to show you two things today. The Behringer Wing can send MIDI signals from the snapshots as well as from the custom control button here. And I'll show you how to send these MIDI signals and address them to the correct receivers. The second thing I'll show you is that you can also control the Behringer Wing remotely via MIDI, for example, from a digital audio workstation. In my case, I'm using Cubase in this example. I would suggest you subscribe to my channel now. The subscribe button is down there, bell on, and then we'll dive right into the topic of MIDI and the Behringer Wing. There are two ways to connect the Behringer Wing with other MIDI devices. You have DIN ports at the back, meaning a MIDI in and a MIDI out port directly on the console. With these, you can traditionally connect the console to another MIDI device using a MIDI cable. The second option, which is particularly recommended if you have a PC available, is that you can connect the console to a PC using USB and then send the MIDI signals through the PC. In my example today, I'm using the USB interface and the PC, but it works just as well with the DIN sockets. I'll also show you later how to switch between them. However, what I need to send MIDI over USB is an appropriate driver. It is also completely irrelevant which audio signal I send to the PC. So if I use a Dante signal, for example, and or an IS-50 signal, you still need a USB connection to enable this MIDI control. This does not work over audio protocols. For this, go to the Behringer website and type Wing into the search at the top. Then you will reach the videos
From
page.
the Wing
And up here under downloads, you will find the corresponding Behringer. Download and install the Wing USB audio driver. Because so many people ask about it, I'm going to show you in my example exactly how you can use a snap that you load onto the Behringer Wing to also trigger another snapshot in the Wave Super Rack. After I've installed this driver, I open the Wing USB audio driver here. I have now loaded the Performer version here, but it works just as well with the SoundGrid version. Now, I first need to make some settings. Specifically, I need to click on Setup and set up a controller down here. You see, I have the option to set up 5 controllers here, and I'm taking the first slot now. And say, this will be a MIDI controller. Now, it has created a MIDI controller for me. I click on the gear icon and configure it. On the left, I can now select where I expect my MIDI signals to come from at MIDI in. In my case, I am choosing Wing MIDI control here, because that is the MIDI device provided by the Wing driver. Over here, I can now select what address the device should have. In the entire MIDI network, every device needs its address to which I can later send commands. In my example, I'll just use MIDI address 3 to show you how it all works together. Okay, we are actually almost done here. But to see that something changes, I'm going to set up 2 snapshots here. That means I'm going to create a rack and put in 2 plugins. First, I'll take a Q1 equalizer here. So there it is. Here, I'll adjust this a bit. This is all just so we have an example, so you can see that something changes here later, and I will add a second plugin, namely here a double 4. So I am turning off the Doppler now. I'll leave the Q1 as it is for now and save the first snapshot up here. I'll say store new snapshot, and it's important here that when you save the snapshot, MIDI snap 1, that you assign an external ID. That's the ID that I can call up later via MIDI. In my case,
4.1.
So now we create a second snapshot where I turn off the top plugin, turn on the bottom plugin, make some changes again, and select Store New Snapshot. This time I name it MIDI Snap 2 and assign it an ID. So now let's test if the snapshots are saved, which means I can call up snapshot 1 here. So here it is. You see the nose is pulled down here, and the plugins are equalizer on, doubler off, and the same goes for snap 2, where the nose is pulled up here, and now the doubler is on, and the equalizer is off. Now we have two snaps that we can call up here, and now we need to configure the wing to call up these two snapshots. The console is currently completely blank, meaning I've deleted everything, initialized it, and nothing is saved. First, we need to configure a few things, namely, I can here in the setup under select remote to choose which MIDI control function I want and what we need here to send something from the console to the Super Rack is this Scene MIDI TX. And I set it to USB. USB because, as I mentioned earlier, I send my signals over USB to the computer, to the driver. If you want to work with the DIN sockets, you can select DIN here. I will show you later how you can do it so that it does not matter which you select, one of the two. Also important are these small eye icons here, as you can click on them to get information about what each option in the menu does. In my case, it says here, any MIDI message can be sent. Use hexadecimal notation, optionally separated by blank or comma. So you can choose whether to use spaces between individual commands or a comma. Now, very important, use D colon or U colon to route to DIN or USB. This is crucial as I can't use a D colon or U colon before my hex command to choose whether it should be sent to the DIN sockets or the USB interface. This means I can send each command individually from the console and I'm not bound to DIN or USB. So someone who has connected both USB and DIN to the console can also send signals to both interfaces. We're still doing this via USB, and I'll save two scenes here in the show control. First, of course, I need to create a new show, and it's now called test. This is now my show. It's currently empty. There are no snaps or scenes in it, and we're now storing two snaps so that we can call these two snaps from the Super Rack on the PC. To clearly see that a different snap is loaded, I'm doing it like this. In the first snap, these four faders are up. I say save and scope. And I select all, but be careful, I do not want to save the config, so I do not save it along with the preferences and surface, because that's where this MIDI background control is included in the setup. So this scene MIDI TX is saved there, and if I change it later, I will have to adjust it for each individual snap when I save it, and I don't want that. So I'll leave them and save them later as an extra snap with just these settings. So once again, save to scope, I take them out, I save, and I do. BDA 1. So, and now the second snap, I now drag these four fields down and push these four fields up. Then I select save and scope and do the same again with snap MIDI 2. Now we can quickly check if it works. I call up the first snap, fits. I call up the second snap, fits. But on the Super Rack, we still don't see any change at the moment. Why is that? Yes, because we haven't sent anything over yet. We're not sending a MIDI command to the Super Rack yet. How can I send a MIDI command with the snap file? To do this, I go to show, select the respective snap I want to use to send the signal, and then go here. Here is the symbol for those who can't find it, send MIDI. And now he says here, I can enter one here.
Enter TX string.
And in my case, I now input the TX string that I need in order to make a change in the Super Rack. To change a snap, first I need a C. The C at the beginning of the MIDI string stands for program change. There are also control change, note on, and note off commands. They each have different hex symbols. Program change, which we need here, starts with a C. The next character in the MIDI string is the address, which we just set. And you remember, we set the Super Rack on the PC to address 3. The address in the string is always the real address -1. So it starts at 0, which means the MIDI device with address 1, also known as MIDI channel 1, has 0 in the string. The device with 2 on MIDI channel 2 or with MIDI address 2 has the 1, and we are on MIDI channel 3, MIDI address 3. So we need to enter a 2 here. A space follows, and now comes in hexadecimal the program or the snap that I want to load. And here, you remember, I assigned these external IDs earlier, these numbers, and that's exactly what I need at this point. And I recall that my snap with the 1, so the program I want to load with this snap, was assigned the number 1. Therefore, I now enter 01 and say, OK. Then I go to the snap with number 2 here on the ring and do the same thing. I'm saying, see here, 2 for program change and MIDI channel 3. And now I am loading snap 2 instead of snap 1. Okay, I'll say save here briefly, then it saves it to the show. And when I call up the snap now, and you will see it now, I choose snap 1 here, and we'll look over at the Super Rack. Then we see that it is now changing along with it. I would now switch to DIN in the setup here. Yes, so now it doesn't send the command anymore, meaning the MIDI command. It doesn't send it to the USB interface anymore. Instead, it sends it to the DIN interface. And if you now look over at Super Rack, you'll see that the snap doesn't change. I can work around this by simply saying in the string of the snap, so in the MIDI string, I insert a U colon at the beginning. I do that with this one, and I do that with that one too. U colon. And if you look over now, then you see that it works again, because with this U colon, it knows, okay, I need to send this MIDI string to the USB interface. You can do exactly the same thing using the custom controls here on the mixer. I'll also show you how that works. To do this, click on 4. To configure these custom controls, select the respective button you want to use to send the MIDI command to load the respective snap. Then at the bottom, there is this one, MIDI program change. We are on channel 3 here. This is not in hex anymore. It actually starts at 1, so 1, 2, 3. And we want to load program 1 with this and with the neighboring button. We want to load program 2 on channel 3. Then I can load the snaps here with the 2 custom controls. No, I can't yet. You see, when I press here, nothing changes at first. That's due to 2 things. The first is that we haven't enabled the custom controls being sent over the USB interface. For that, go to Setup, Remote, and then there's External MIDI Control. If I press the I here, you will see MIDI Control Change, Note, and PC Commands, and Custom Control. PC Commands here stands for Program Change Commands.
Those are exactly the ones I'm just sending out.
That means I first turn on the USB. When I press it now, you can already see that MIDI is arriving at the Super
You can
Rack.
see this at the top right on the MIDI light, which lights up every time I press here.
The second thing I need to know is that the programs here go from 1.
Until next time.
I have 128 to choose from. When I now check which IDs I have assigned, I can see that up here. I can check it on the show. And then I see that I have assigned a address 1 for MIDI snap 1. And here, for MIDI snap 2, the address is 2. However, the address range here is not the same. If I send program 1 here in the super rack, it doesn't correspond to ID1, but to ID0. Because, as you see, the first 128 merit signal that I assigned here is address 1 that I assigned here. And if I send address 2 here in the super rack, it doesn't correspond to ID1, but to ID0. And if I send address 3 here in the super rack, it doesn't correspond to ID1, but to ID0. The programs here range from 0 to 127, meaning here 0 corresponds to program 1 here on the wing. However, since I have selected programs 1 and 2 here, I logically need to choose program 2 here and select 3. So, because program 1 would be 0, program 2 is 1, and program 3 is 2. You always have to be a bit careful whether the ranges go from 0 to 127 or from 1 to 128. Now everything should be set up correctly, and I can now use the 2 custom controls here, as you can see, to change the snap. So folks, what do you think? It's pretty easy once you know how, right? Set up the controller, assign a MIDI address or MIDI channel, and then assign a hex string to the corresponding address or MIDI channel through the console. That's how it works. And it also works in the opposite direction, of course. You can simply send signals to the console and control it. I'll show you that with Cubase. I now have a blank Cubase project here. Of course, to control MIDI signals, I need a MIDI track. So I will insert a MIDI track here. I'll name it Bing Control. Now I need to select which MIDI device this MIDI track should send its, and now I can select that over here. So I now choose Wing MIDI Control, which is the device, the driver of the Behringer wing. And now I need to know to which channel, that is to which MIDI channel or to which address I am sending my signals. And for that, let's take a look at the wing. When you press Setup here, you'll see various options. There's Show Control and there's Scene Change. Show Control is used to execute the commands built into Show Control here, like next, go, previous, go, next and previous, and go. If you want to load scenes directly, such as snaps, scenes in this case, our scenes are snaps, or there are other scenes like clips. If you want to load them directly because they get a number, then you use Scene Change here. So I set this Scene Change to USB because I want to receive the signals specifically from the USB interface. And now I need to know on which MIDI channel or address I need to send the signals from Cubase. And this little eye helps with that. So I click on it once. And here it gives me more information about this specific option. It now says MIDI scene change, MIDI channel 7. That means the Behringer wing is now expecting commands on this MIDI channel 7. The commands for switching snaps via MIDI. So I set this MIDI channel in Cubase to 7, and now I just need to quickly a few notes that I enter. So I have already set the program change here. It's important that you set this to program change, not to velocity or pitch, but to program change. This corresponds exactly to the C that I also entered in the string earlier, which is precisely this program change.
Slot.
So now I want to shortly switch to scene 1 at measure number 3. Switch to scene 1. So at measure 3, I change to 1. And at measure 6, I want to switch to scene 2. And at bar 10, I want to switch back to scene 1. Then I'll create a loop here to measure 13. And when I play this now, you will see that the Behringer wing switches each time it reaches this point. So now you see each time Cubase encounters a MIDI command here.
That's the snap at the desk above.
You can now use this perfectly for automation. For example, if you have created a track where you want to switch between chorus, verse, and a third part, with different snaps. For example, if you want to bring up a guitar solo volume, then you can save a snap here and it will be triggered at the right moment. So folks, this is how MIDI controlling works from the Behringer Wing to other devices and from other devices to the Behringer Wing. I had fun with you again today, and you can now use MIDI control really effectively. You can easily trigger various devices with the snap. For example, I do it live, allowing me to control cameras with the snap, such as MIDI-capable PTZ cameras, or I also have an Echo Pro from Line 6, where I can load programs via MIDI as well. I do that through the snaps, so it's super flexible and works really well. Once you understand it, it should pose no problems. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Yours, Basti.